All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. Thank you to those who braved the weather tonight. Baruch Hashem. Certainly extra schar for coming out on a night like this. So we are, Mirz Hashem, first our shir tonight is dedicated by Rachi Tenenbaum in commemoration of the yahrzeit of her grandmother, Elga Bas Moshe. Zichron Levrach, we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. So Mirz Hashem, what we are going to do tonight, and is going to carry us over tonight into next week in Mirz Hashem, is focusing on Kapitel Lamed, chapter 30 in Sefer Tehillim. And the reason why why I'm focusing on this kapitel, even though we've actually spoken about it in the past, is because this kapitel, chapter 30, is associated with the Yom Tov of Chanukah. So Mirz Hashem tonight is going to be the intro to this kapitel, and then Mirz Hashem next week is going to be our pre-Chanukah shir in Mirz Hashem, getting a little bit of a head start on the Yom Tov. So tonight we'll kind of lay the basic, we'll call it theological or hashkafic framework for the kapitel, and then Mirz Hashem next week delve a little bit more into the actual Chanukah implications of it. So let's begin. Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis Davis. Let's just first take a quick look at the sheets right up here if anyone needs. Just take a quick look at the kapitel itself. So literally again, Mizmor, let's just translate. Mizmor is a song, a shir is also a song, so somewhat repetitive. Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, a dedication of the home for David HaMelech. Okay? David HaMelech then goes on. Aramimcha Hashem kidel lisani v'lo simachta oivayli. Hashem, I will praise you, I'll exalt you, for you have raised me up and not allowed my enemies to rejoice over me. Hashem Elokai, shivati elecha v'tirpoini. Hashem, I reached out to you and you healed me. Hashem ha'elisa min shol nafshichi salim yardibar. Hashem, you've lifted me out. You brought me out from the grave, revived me from the descent into the pit. Zamru la'Hashem chasidov v'hodu l'zecher kadsho. So we're not going to go through the whole kapitel, but again, what's interesting is, at first glance, this kapitel, this particular chapter of Tehillim, seems to be very much like most of the chapters of Tehillim. What's the dominant theme in Sefer Tehillim? Dominant theme in Sefer Tehillim? I'm sorry? God helps me. In other words, essentially, most of Sefer Tehillim follows the following model. I was in trouble. I thought it was helpless, but then you came through for me. That's the theme of Sefer Tehillim. The truth is, that's because that's the theme of David HaMelech's life. Constant struggle, constant overwhelming difficulty, circumstances that look totally, unnavigable. Just you could not come through. And yet, with incredible siyata d'shmaya and with incredible divine providence, divine assistance, David HaMelech finds a way through. So at first glance, this kapitel really seems to have the same exact theme. My enemies won't rejoice over me. I was down and out. You lifted me out of the pit. I was having difficulty. Same basic theme. But of course we know part of the power of Sefer Tehillim is that, although it's not true necessarily with every single kapitel, but many of the chapters in Sefer Tehillim correspond to specific events in David HaMelech's life. So what we're going to, the overarching question we're going to focus on tonight is, what is the theme of this kapitel? So again, if we want to go home early tonight, we could just simply say the theme of this kapitel is I was in trouble. I didn't think I would make it out of trouble, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you were there and you helped me. Absolutely correct. The question is there something additional or something deeper unfolding over here? Then there's another intriguing part, right? When we open with this phrase, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. If I were to ask you, what event does this kapitel correspond to? What would you say? What event? Beis HaMikdash. Right? After all, again, David HaMelech is talking about a Chanukas Habayis, a dedication of a home. So, Bepashtos, on the most basic level, which home is David HaMelech referring to? It would sound like the Beis HaMikdash. What's the problem? What's the problem with that interpretation? Excellent. Okay, good morning, everyone. Good. Now we're getting into it. Excellent, good. David HaMelech didn't build the Beis HaMikdash. So it's interesting that David HaMelech has a kapitel that says Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, a song for the dedication of the home LeDavid. LeDavid. David HaMelech, you didn't build the Beis HaMikdash. She wanted very badly to build the Beis HaMikdash. Remember again, what David HaMelech wanted more than anything, we're going to see, was to be able to build the Beis HaMikdash. Why that is, Mirz Hashem will come to. So question number one is, what is the overarching theme? Question number 2 is David HaMelech didn't build the Beis HaMikdash, so why is this kapitel Beis HaMikdash centric? And then question number 3, which is actually interesting, is if you actually read through the kapitel, you through the chapter of Tehillim, actually the dominant discussion, a dominant theme, is really about sickness, illness, and having been ill and then having been healed from that illness. In fact, Chapter 30, Kapitel Lamed, is actually one of the kapitach that we say when davening for a chola, when davening for a person who is ill. So we have to then ask ourselves the connection between Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, again, dedication of the home, and also prayer for illness. So let's take this step by step and kind of begin to unravel it. So take a look at number 2. So the first thing, the approach of the Malbim. So the Malbim writes in source number 2 something amazing. This is incredible. He says, Hamizmar Kulu Yusad Laseis Hoda Bechaluso Vayechi Mechalyo. Malbim comes along and says, this chapter of Tehillim is not about the Beis HaMikdash. It's not about the Beis HaMikdash. What is it about? This is the kapitel that David HaMelech sang when he was healed from illness. David HaMelech suffered an almost fatal illness, He was healed from that almost fatal illness, and this kapitel is the response. It's v'lo nimtza bo shum inyamei chanukas habayis u'mevuar she'abayis hamuskar po hu abayis hamashali hu aguf shumaon lenefesh ubayis la'adam hapanini ashuch v'dar kirbo. This is incredible. This is so amazing. So the Malbim says the bias, the home being referred to over here, is not a physical home. Well, it is a physical home, but it's not a domicile. It's not a residence. It's not a Beis HaMikdash. What is it? It's the body. The body is also called the home, right? Where is the body? What is the body the home to? The body is a home to the soul, to the neshama, right? The neshama resides inside of the body. So this is incredible. The Malbim says, don't get thrown that Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid is talking about the Beis HaMikdash. A, David didn't build the Beis HaMikdash. B, this kapitel actually doesn't discuss the Beis HaMikdash. So what is it referring to? Says the Malbim, it's referring to David HaMelech was ill. Again, we'll discuss the nature of his illness. We'll discuss that. But ultimately, he was healed from illness, and this is like the Thanksgiving. Okay, right? The Thanksgiving ode, right? Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Modim Anachnu Lach. Thank you, Hashem, for healing me from illness. Beautiful. He goes on, he says, V'aguf ha'chomri u'bayis. So we actually don't have to do the rest. So that's the Malbim. That's the Malbim's approach. Take a look at the Radak. So this is incredible. The Radak disagrees. And by the way, the beauty, as we're going to see, is the approaches themselves are not mutually exclusive. So the Radak says, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. He says, Chibru David, Shiyomru, Bechanukas Beis HaMikdash. So listen to this. The Radak says it's not true. At the end of the day, this actually was created in order to go ahead and be recited at the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. Right? There was going to be a Chanukas Habayis. Remember again, we have a concept of a Chanukas Habayis. Sorry, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. We have the concept of a Chanukas Habayis. The first Chanukas Habayis, of course, was the Beis HaMikdash. There was a dedication. So David HaMelech ran ahead and wrote this kapitel of Tehillim, Dafka, to be sung at the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. That's when it was to be sung. Now listen to this. V'afapi she'ein bazeh mizmor zecher habayis hiskir bo slichas psha'av. So this is, get ready for this. Here's the problem, right? Let's take a step back, right? The Malbim, which was source number 2, makes a lot of sense. Why does the Malbim make a lot of sense? Because what's the theme of the kapitel? What's the dominant theme of the kapitel? Illness and being healed from illness. So the Malbim is beautiful because the Malbim says, you're right. The bias, the home that David HaMelech is referring to, is not a physical home. It's not a physical home. It's not even a spirit. It's the body. It's the body. So David HaMelech is singing a song on the day that there was, so to speak, a Chanukas Habayis. And what's the Chanukas Habayis? It's the rededication of his health. It's the rededication of the vitality of his body. He's happy, he's healthy, his health is restored. That's the kapitel. Comes along the Radak, and the Radak says that no, this is actually about the Beis HaMikdash. But if it's about the Beis Hamikdash, then how does the rest of the kapitel actually make sense? So look what he writes. This is incredible. Because the rest of the kapitel, remember again, discusses illness, but also discusses forgiveness. So what does the Beis Hamikdash have to do with forgiveness? And here, the Radak says something amazing. He says, Shayuchoshvim oivav shelo tiskayemu hamalucha ulezaro acharav laonish osa avon. Remember, we've spoken about this concept many, many times. David HaMelech's detractors. David HaMelech had a number of detractors, right? So first of all, again, first it started that he really wasn't Jewish, right? Because he's a descendant of Rus. Rus was a Moabite convert. People tried to discredit her conversion. And then at the end of the day, again, people also tried to discredit him as a usurper, right? He went ahead and he stole the throne from his father-in-law, from Shaul. Again, both false claims. Then there was another discredit. Remember again, the event that forever shapes and colors you know how like in life, there are many events and many occurrences which define us, but often in life there are singular events that put us on a particular trajectory in life. For David HaMelech, that event was the episode with Bathsheba. That event went ahead and propelled David in multiple directions. And I want to point out, many of them incredibly positive. What could be positive? David HaMelech is the paradigmatic Baal Tshuva. Why? Remember again, when David HaMelech is confronted by Nasan and Avi, when David HaMelech is confronted by the prophet, and he's confronted by what he did, what does David HaMelech do? We've actually spoken about this. What did David HaMelech do? He owned it. He said, Chatasi. It's incredible. I don't know about you, but most times when I'm confronted by something negative, my reflexive reaction is to deflect, to explain, no, it's not really this. And David HaMelech, in his greatness, when confronted with the fact that he made a mistake, chatasi, one word. No like chatasi but, right? Or chatasi and, chatasi. David HaMelech is the paradigmatic Baal Tshuva. He teaches us how to turn things around from the most terrible and potentially horrific circumstances to something that is actually a platform for our foundation for dramatic growth. But at the end of the day, this event also gave David HaMelech, his detractors, an incredible amount of fodder, right? An incredible amount of fuel to go ahead and discredit him, calling him an adulterer, calling him a sinner, calling him an immoral individual. So listen to this. People were convinced that in the aftermath of the sin with Bathsheba, David HaMelech had lost the opportunity for a dynastic monarchy. Remember again, David wasn't the first king. David was the second king. Shaul was the first king. So what was the difference between Shaul's monarchy and David's monarchy? Shaul's monarchy was never meant to be dynastic. It was never meant. It could have potentially gone to his son, but it was never meant to continue in perpetuity. That was never the designation. Because dynastic monarchy comes from Yehuda. Remember again, Shaul was from Ephraim. So it comes from the tribe of Yehuda. So as such, at the end of the day, David HaMelech wasn't just given the throne. He was to be the father of dynastic monarchy. Well, people said after the episode of Bathsheba, no way that's happening. Done. David, maybe you'll serve out your days on the throne, but there is no way that a dynastic monarchy is coming from a guy like this. That's what people said. By the way, it hurts to say, right? It sounds strange to speak about David HaMelech this way, right? It sounds strange, but I've mentioned this many times as well. Usually, great people become great when they're dead, right? Generally, great people are revered and respected when they're dead, and when they're alive, they're often treated like garbage. I know it sounds like a harsh thing to say, but it's true. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest example of this, right? Moshe Rabbeinu dies and everybody's crying. Hello? Right? Did you see how you treated him for 40 years in the desert? Right? Did you see constant situation after situation, rebellion after rebellion? Again, often it's true in general in life that we often don't appreciate the greatness of people until they're gone. In any event, so David HaMelech's detractor said, no more dynastic monarchy. So what happens? Even though David had a promise from the Navi. Remember again, after David does tshuva, and he atones for his sin, so the Navi tells him, you are forgiven, and in fact, you will be the father of a dynastic monarchy. With all that, by the way, not only that, but remember, who's going to be the continuation of David HaMelech's monarchy? Who? Shlomo. Who's Shlomo's mother? Bathsheba. Which also tells you that not only is David forgiven, but ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself blesses the union. Right? The union of David and Bathsheba, even though it began not in less than ideal circumstances, the Ribono Shel Olam blesses the union. When Shlomo is born, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him a name. The name that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Shlomo was Yedidya, the beloved one of Hashem. Ein forgiveness gedol mizo. Right? This is forgiveness. But here's what's incredible. What's incredible is David HaMelech knew all of this, but no one else did, and no one else believed it. So look at paragraph base. He says, So remember again, at the end of David HaMelech's life, just so you understand what a turbulent life David HaMelech had, right? And that the man never had peace. He never had peace. Remember again, and on his deathbed, we just read it actually a couple weeks ago, it's the Haftorah for Parshas Chayei Sarah. On his deathbed, what's happening to David HaMelech? What's happening? He's dying. He's literally dying. And what happens? One of his sons, Adoniah ben Chagis, decides to say, Misnaseh Lemor Ani Amloch. He goes ahead and he declares himself as king. David HaMelech is literally dying. He's in his final moments of life. And already again, there's, we wouldn't call it like a total rebellion, but it's certainly a quasi-rebellion that's unfolding right as David HaMelech's, waning moments of life. So when people see this, they say, oh, you see, Shlomo's not going to be king. The dynastic monarchy is over. Now, you skip down a little bit. So, I'm sorry. Look at the last 3 lines in paragraph base. Leficha chibar mizmor shir Chanukas habayis al derech sheyahizkir bo slichas chatov shirefuas nafsho ki bazeh inyan noda haslicha l'chol adam. So, I'm going to read these words and then we're going to explain it better by looking at the Gemara. So therefore, the Radak says over here that this capital, so let's zoom out a little bit over here. So this capital is talking about the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis David is a song composed by David HaMelech to be sung at the dedication of the actual Beis HaMikdash. But David, why are you concerned with the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash? You are not going to be here. You're not going to see it. David was already told in no uncertain terms that he was not going to build the Beis HaMikdash. That's just the way that it is. So why is he going ahead and composing the song to be sung at the dedication? Because David felt that somehow the dedication would be his vindication. The dedication of the Beis HaMikdash was the vindication of David HaMelech. Now what does this mean? Take a look at source number 6. Skip a little bit. This is incredible. So, take a look at number 6. Not that 5 is not important. 5 is important. It's a beautiful Gemara, but you'll look at it on your own. Look at number 6. So listen to this. So what does it mean? David, when he says in Tehillim, Chash Baruch Hu, perform for me a good sign and let my enemies see and let them be embarrassed. What does this mean? Amar David, Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Mecholi al Osa Avan. David said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please forgive me for the sin I have committed. Forgive me. Amar Lo, Machalacha. Machalach, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. By the way, can you imagine how wonderful it would be to hear those words from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I believe that Hashem forgives me. I believe it. But can you imagine if you come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you do real tshuva, and the Ribono Shel Olam says back to you, Machalach, you are forgiven. How incredible it must be to hear those 2 words. David hears it, but David's not finished. Amar Lo, Asei imi os b'chayai. Hashem, I have another request. Can you give me a sign? Can you give me a sign that I am forgiven. Now, understand, why is David HaMelech asking for a sign? Why is he asking for a sign? What do you think? I'm sorry? To show people. Remember again, the sign's not for David, because remember again, David just heard from God, you're forgiven. That's good enough, right? You can take that to the bank. That's good. So the sign is not for him. The sign is for everyone else. I need people to see that I'm forgiven. You have to understand. The Gemara says that David HaMelech was tormented about this. That the Gemara says David HaMelech would walk into the Beis Medrash, and his adversaries would say, David, always forget, what's the halacha? What's the punishment for someone who commits adultery? They would do this. They would publicly embarrass David HaMelech. What's the punishment for someone who commits adultery? So David HaMelech, if you could imagine, probably turning red or white, just embarrassed and demolished, said, the punishment for one who commits adultery is death in this world, but he has a portion in the world to come. But for someone who embarrasses his fellow Jew in public, dies in this world and has no portion in the world to come. But just understand, that's what David HaMelech is contending with, day in and day out. So he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your word is good enough for me, but it would really help if you gave me a sign. It would really help if you gave me some type of tangible sign so everyone else could see that I am forgiven as well. So look what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. This is incredible. Hashem says, Amar lo, bechayecha eini modia. I will not give you a sign during your lifetime. However, bechaye Shlomo bincha ani modia. But during the lifetime of your son Shlomo, I'll give you a sign. What was the sign of the lifetime of Shlomo? Listen to this. Kishebana Shlomo es beis hamikdash. Bikesh v'hachnis aron lebeis kachik edashim. So famous story, right? The first Beis Hamikdash is built. Shlomo HaMelech is dedicating it, and remember again, he's getting ready to bring the Aron, the Ark, into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the Holy of Holies. Only one problem. Dovku she'arim zeh bazeh. The gates of the Beis Hamikdash would not open. Can you imagine that? They spent all this time, all of this money, building the Beis Hamikdash, and now when it's finally time to bring the Aron in, the gates themselves won't open. So Shlomo HaMelech begins to daven. Amar Shlomo, Esrim v'arba, Renano Solonana. Shlomo HaMelech says 24 supplications and they're not answered. Kevan she'amar, Hashem Elokim, al toshef pnei mishichecha, zachra lechas de David avdecha miyad na'aneh. This is incredible. The moment that Shlomo brought up his father, the gates opened. So incredible, right? Incredible. The gates of the Beis Hamikdash wouldn't open up for Shlomo HaMelech. They wouldn't open up for all the tefillos and all the supplications. When do they open up? They opened up when Shlomo mentioned his father's name. One mention of David HaMelech, and suddenly the gates fly open. Now, what did that show? Ba'os Shah nepchu pnei kol sonei David kishulei kedera. In that moment, all of David HaMelech's enemies, their complexion became like ashen. Ashen. Literally, it's like blackened like the bottom of a pot. They became ashen. In other words, they realized that they were tormenting about Tshuva. They were tormenting an innocent man. The Yadu Kala Am V'Chol Yisrael Shemachalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Al Osa Avon. And ultimately, again, they recognized that in fact, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had forgiven David HaMelech for that particular sin. So an incredible. So now, if you kind of bring this all together, this is the Radak. So the Radak therefore understands that Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis LeDavid. Why is David HaMelech? Why is he creating the song for the dedication of the Beis Hamikdash? And the answer is, and again, right, and remember, especially since the rest of the kapitel is talking about, again, illness, sickness, overcoming enemies. The Radak will say that this entire kapitel is about the difficulties that David HaMelech had navigating in a world that looked at him like a sinner. How do you navigate in a world? And by the way, he's the leader. He's the king. And yet again, it's not everyone who looked down on him, but certainly was enough people. And remember again, they were people in high positions. Had the overwhelming nature of navigating in a world like that. Chash Baruch Hu, just forgive me. Chash Baruch Hu said, I won't forgive you. I forgive you, but the sign won't come in your lifetime, but it'll come in the lifetime of your son Shlomo. When does it come? During the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. So dedication was David HaMelech's vindication. That's Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. An incredible, incredible idea. The dedication is the vindication. And just before we go on, I'll just mention that you see, we'll come back to it. So what's interesting to note, because there's a Chanukah Taina already tonight, but what's interesting to note is the following, that why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgive? In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave David during his lifetime, right? He did forgive him. So why not give him the sign, right? In other words, it's not that Hashem's saying, I don't forgive you yet, and therefore I can't give you a sign during your lifetime. I forgive you. So ultimately, again, if I forgive you, why not give him the physical, tangible, public sign of forgiveness? And perhaps what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also trying to teach David, but not just teach David, but teach us, is that sometimes that in life, you have to wait for things to come together. Right? One of the most difficult things in life is often we go through life and we are incredibly impatient. We want everything the way we want it, and we want it now. And we want it now. And often in life we become very frustrated when things don't materialize the way we want them to materialize at the pace in which we want them to materialize. And what the Chadosh Baruch Hu perhaps is trying to teach David HaMelech was a very important lesson, that the Ribono Shel Olam runs the timeline of the world. And that sometimes we just have to go ahead and wait for things to come together. And specifically, one of the things we have to wait for things to come together is forgiveness. Sometimes forgiveness is not immediate. You know, this has applications in many different relationships. Think about this for just a moment in human relationships. Think about a situation where you've wronged someone. Now, okay, you'll say, I've never wronged someone. Okay, maybe you have a friend who's wronged someone. So think about your friend who's wronged someone, right? And you know what happens? You ever have that moment where you know you did something wrong? And I have like a David HaMelech moment. I want to own it. So what happens? Bless you. What happens? I go over to the person I wronged, and I apologize. And it's a heartfelt, not like one of those like, I'm sorry if something I did hurt your feelings, right? Not like one of those apologies, right? The non-apology apology, right? But an actual apology. I'm sorry that I hurt you. Like a genuine, heartfelt apology. So it's interesting. Often, when you are the apologizer, right, what do you expect from the hurt party? What do you expect? Forgiveness. And when do you expect it? Right away. And it's actually interesting. There's an interesting dynamic that often happens in relationships, that sometimes the offender gets offended, right? I apologized. I apologized already. So if and it's heartfelt. There's even like a little like moisture over here at the corner of my eye, right? It's like really genuine. I really mean it. I really feel bad. And how can you not accept it right here and now? And the truth is, as we become a little bit more skilled in relationships, we recognize that sometimes forgiveness takes time. Forgiveness takes time. And even if you're genuinely sorry for what you did, the other person may not be ready to forgive you just yet. And it's so important, because one of the keys to success in human relationships is the ability to apologize and then take a step back. Because I have to apologize if I've done something. I have to own it, but I also have no right to expect someone who's been hurt by me to just forgive me immediately. Sometimes it takes time. And it's almost as if the Ribono Shel Olam is modeling that a little bit with David HaMelech. David, I love you, and I forgive you. But there's a part of forgiveness that I am not yet ready to give you. There's a part of forgiveness I'm going to give it to you because I see that you're a genuine penitent. I see that you're a real Baal Tshuva, but I'm not ready yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, to give you that peace. Why I'm not ready? I'm just not ready. And what a profound lesson in the way we navigate our relationships. And it's true with HaKadosh Baruch Hu also. It's true in your relationships. It's true with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that sometimes forgiveness takes time. And even after I offer up that heartfelt apology, it still may take time to go ahead and repair that relationship. David HaMelech wanted the external sign, A, because he wanted to rehabilitate his public image, that's Aleph, and B, because the public sign was like the Makeh B'Padish, it was like the final hammer blow to show that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had really forgiven him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm just not ready yet. And sometimes, again, in relationships, we have to be ready to ask for forgiveness, to apologize, but also recognize that we may not be granted that mechila, that forgiveness, as quickly as we want it. And you have to learn to be okay with that in life. There's also two more lessons that I just kind of want to tie everything up with. The other piece, and we'll save the Chanukah tie-in for the last piece, but David HaMelech also teaches us something else. There's a number of lessons in this. This I happen to think that in general, this kapitel is one of the most powerful chapters in Tehillim. We'll see it more next week as well. But every line, every pasuk is another life, like another life gem that David is giving us. Take a look at number 6 on your sheet. David HaMelech says, just quoting the pasuk from the kapitel, "V'ani amarti b'shalvi ba'alamot li'olam." David HaMelech literally says, and I said it, yes. Oh, 30, of course. So, David HaMelech says, V'ani amarti b'shalvi bal emot li'olam. David HaMelech says, literally, and I said in my tranquility, I will never falter. I said in my tranquility, I will never falter. So what does this mean? So this, and we're going to see how this ties into the opening pasuk as well. Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis LeDavid. So watch this. So Rashi says, and this is really incredible. Rashi says, "V'ani amarti b'shalvi b'shalvasi." Listen to this. David HaMelech says, when life was tranquil, when life was good, hayisi choshev ba'alamot li'olam. When life was tranquil, I thought to myself, I will never falter. Right? In other words, we've all had moments like that in life, right? Where everything is perfect. Like those 24 seconds, right? Everything is just as it should be. And it's easy sometimes in those moments of tranquility to lull yourself into a false sense of security, of thinking, okay, everything's good. Right? V'ani amarti b'shalvi, I said in moments of tranquility, l'balamot, nothing bad is ever going to happen. He says, Aval ein hadavar birshusi, ki em birshuso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hu birtzono hamid es hari. So again, Rashi says, so David HaMelech says something amazing. I made the mistake in life, and part of the power of Tehillim is David HaMelech also gives us like a full view into his life mistakes, which is such a gift for us. Because the truth is, in general, you learn a lot more from people's mistakes, or just we learn a lot more from our mistakes than we do from our accomplishments. And all the more so with David HaMelech, we learn so much from seeing the mistakes he made, but ultimately, again, not just the mistakes, but how he rebounded from them. So he's saying, I made a mistake, I made a life mistake. Not an avera, a mistake. That I assumed that in moments of tranquility, when life was good, that's just the way it was going to remain. And that life was always going to be fine. And I learned in some very dramatic ways that at the end of the day, life is a series of peaks and valleys. And the one who controls those peaks and valleys is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, Rashi understands this just from like a situational life perspective. Right? That I thought my life was good, and in moments when life is good, I thought that this would be the way that it would just remain li'olam va'ed, forever. And boy, was I wrong. Did I get some really difficult circumstances in life that I never thought were going to occur. But I realized from that ultimately there really is no consistency in life. And the only consistency is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Baruch Shalom is the consistency in life. He's the only consistent in life, only consistent factor in life. And he determines how everything is going to go. The Radak understands that in number 8. Take a look at number 8. He says, V'ani amarti b'shal ba'al ta'olam, k'shayisi shalei v'shaket shelo mashal b'yitzahara, hayisi choshev ba'atzmi, shelo emot v'lo echet ha'olam. So this is incredible. So the Radak says, he says it on a spiritual level. The David HaMelech said, in my moments when I was spiritually on my game and spiritually doing great, I thought I will never spiritually falter. Right? I thought we've all had moments like that, right? In those moments when you feel like spiritually strong. And you say to yourself, like I am impervious to sin. Those mistakes I made in the past, never again. And then, what happens? I do it again. So the Melech says, Vani Amarti B'Shavi. So it's interesting. So according to Rashi, they're both saying the same theme. They're just seeing it in almost like different angles of life. Rashi's saying it just like in a general life sense. When I experience tranquility, I made the mistake of thinking that tranquility could be a constant. But it's not a constant. It's not a constant. The Radak, I made the mistake of thinking that spiritual tranquility, being spiritually strong, is a constant. But I was wrong. And what's profound about this? Is David HaMelech is saying, and this is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, when are we strongest in life? When we go ahead and accept our vulnerabilities. I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. I'm strongest when I accept my vulnerabilities. We often like to think that we're strongest when we overcome our vulnerabilities. But what's the fallacy in that thinking? Right? Vulnerability is inherent in the human condition. For one simple reason. There is no consistency. Right? You know what's interesting is, what's the thing we strive for most in life? The thing we strive for most? Security. The thing we strive for most is consistency, right? I want to be consistently good in my relationships. I want to be a consistently good Jew. I want to be consistent. So the thing we want most in life is consistency. And the one thing you cannot guarantee in life is consistency, right? Think about it. In order to guarantee consistency, you have to control over your future. You don't have control over your future. None of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I can't guarantee consistency. So what's interesting about that is, because I can't guarantee, I can attempt for consistency, I can try for consistency, but at the end of the day, true strength in life comes from embracing vulnerability. Because when I accept vulnerability in life, what that does is, that opens me up to a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because Ribono Shel Olam is the one constant in this world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one source of consistency. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one source of true, reliable strength. If I think that I can be consistent, first of all, it's not true. And also, I don't need God. But if I accept my vulnerabilities, interestingly enough, that's when I rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu most, and that's when I have the true opportunity to self-actualize. I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but embracing vulnerability actually makes us stronger. And that's what David HaMelech is saying over here. V'ani amarti b'shalvi, I made the mistake of thinking, balamot liolam, things are good now, they're always going to be good. Things are spiritually good, they're going to remain spiritually good. Things are physically good, they're going to remain physically good. And I was wrong. Spiritually, I was wrong. The whole episode about Sheva. Physically, I was wrong. I became very ill. But yet, interestingly enough, once I accepted my vulnerability, what does David HaMelech say? Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. When is the personalistic home strongest? When is it strongest? When you accept your vulnerabilities. And this yesod in general is an incredibly overwhelming one in life. And I think, thinking a little bit about this, I think that this is a thing that resonates with so much of what we are experiencing now. Right? One of the pieces, we're so focused on what we need to do during this current war for Am Yisrael. Right? What do we need to do? So we need to daven. We need to give tzedakah. We need to go ahead and learn Torah. There are so many things that we have to do. But if you take a step back, right? How do we feel? So I think different people feel different ways. But I think one of the scariest things that's happening right now is we feel vulnerable. Right? There are close to 240 of our brothers and sisters, men, women, and children, that are somewhere in Gaza under the rulership of people who are the basis elements of humanity. And we don't know what's happening with them. We don't know what's going on with them. And we hear about a hostage deal. But even the hostage deal, what is it going to be? How is it going to materialize? What do we have to give up? Right? Understand the humanitarian ceasefire. There is nothing humanitarian about it. We might want to be humanitarian. What do we have to give up? Right? To get back our children, our mothers, our fathers. So we run the risk of allowing an enemy who doesn't respect our right to live the opportunity to rearm, to regroup. So vulnerable. And you hear this, and this is the problem also sometimes, like when we're glued to the news, right? We hear that the Houthis hijack a tanker in the Red Sea. Why? Because now the Houthis are in the Red Sea. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. So Hamas is in Gaza. 240 of our brothers and sisters, 1,400 murdered, thousands injured, close to 70 soldiers have died. You feel vulnerable. Like it's I don't know, I think for many, at least for me, for the first time in my life, there's an acute feeling of fear. Of fear. Not fear about the result. Not fear about the result. Klal Yisrael will be victorious. Am Yisrael will be successful. We, together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who guides our soldiers, and Miras Hashem, there is no enemy that we cannot overcome. But if you take a step back and you think about it, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming every moment of every day. So what do we do with the vulnerability? What do I do with it? What do I do with it? So David HaMelech whispers in our ear and he says, what do you do with it? Own it. Own it. Don't run from it. You see, a lot of times in life, we run from vulnerability, right? Or we try to pretend that we're not vulnerable in certain ways. Sometimes the best thing you could do with vulnerability is just simply to own it. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling scared. I feel like I'm not sure. I don't know, right? How parents, what do I say to my kids? It was such an interesting thing that I never thought about before. A couple of weeks ago, someone had asked if they could hang up pictures, like the placards of the hostages that say kidnapped on it. And someone asked if they could hang them up in the shul. So I said yes. And then something amazing happened. Like after Shabbos, I got a call actually from a couple of parents. And they said, just like our children were really traumatized by it. Young children walking into shul and seeing this and the kids saying, we don't want to come back to shul, we're scared. And again, I never in a million years did I even put that together. I didn't even think about it. But it was so jarring. It was, because it is. It's traumatizing. It's traumatizing. So what we just try to do is we try not to think about it. When we were in Washington, D.C. last week, so before the Daf Yomi Shir, they were setting up a memorial. I don't want to use the word memorial, but like a memorial for the hostages. And it was so moving. What they did is they had all the pictures out, and they had a pair of shoes by each of the placards. Men's shoes for the men, women's shoes for the women, children's shoes for the children. And you sit there and you're looking at children's shoes. Looking at children's shoes. And you say, Ribono Shel Olam, what's happening in this world? What is this? What is this? This doesn't happen to us anymore. We read about these kind of things like in history. We read these kind of kinnis on Tisha B'Av about things that did happen. This is not supposed to happen today, but it's happening. And you stand there looking at these, and I remember just standing there, it's pitch black, right? It was 5:30 in the morning, pitch black, and they're setting this up. And you realize that the darkness feels heavy. And it feels overwhelming. And you could be standing with thousands of people, and yet you feel so profoundly alone. There's such a vulnerability. And David HaMelech says, own it. Just embrace it. Just embrace it, because if you go ahead and you embrace the vulnerability, you could actually turn it into a strength. And I want to share with you something amazing. With this I'm going to conclude. I didn't put it on the sheet, but I want to share with you something amazing. There's a Rav in Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Shilat, and I saw like a snippet of a shir that he had given to his kehillah. And I want to read to you. He's writing about, he was talking about the hostages. And he says, Kulanu mitutalim me'anose shalach hatufim. You know, we're all overwhelmed by the, right? I think it's like out of this whole thing, the thing that we cannot fully wrap our heads around are the hostages. You know, we believe in Olam Haba. So if somebody dies or somebody is killed, al kiddush Hashem, even in the most brutal fashion, there's a little spark of nechama, because I know that they're in Olam Haba. I know that they're by the Kisei HaKavod, by the throne of glory. But the hostages, he writes over here, Lios muchsak biad rishaim, zeh hadavar hachi mafchid sheyesh ba'olam. If you could conjure up the scariest thing that could ever possibly happen to us in this world, what would it be? It would be to be held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Isn't that crazy? The worst nightmare you could ever come up with, right? What one would have thought like the worst nightmare would have been like, and again, just to see how like we contextualize everything, hearing a child die of an illness, right? 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, right? 6 weeks ago? Yeah, about 6 weeks ago, right? You would have said, that's like the worst thing, the loss of a child is the worst, and now there's something worse. Because now in the twisted reality in which we live, if the child is dying of an illness, but the parents know where the child is, and the parents can hold the child's hand, and the parents could take care of the child, be with the child, that's something incredible. Right? Just understand like how the whole reality has shifted. The scariest thing anyone could ever conjure up is now reality. And he goes on, he says, B'ma anachnu, listen to what he writes. B'ma anachnu yicholim la'azar chutz mil hispalo. So this I thought was incredible. He said, what else can we do besides daven? Now, first of all, the question is something that I think many of us have thought about, but you don't really want to ask it. Why don't you want to ask it? No one likes to ask the questions that make you sound not frum, right? But the truth is, it goes through all of our minds. I'm happy to daven a lot. Is there something else? Is there something else that I could do? Not instead of davening, in addition to davening. And he writes, again, you could agree or disagree, but I'm not even focusing so much on the point that he brings out, but the concept, look what he writes. He says, what could I do? Get ready for this. Ulai livdok eifo gam anachnu shvuyim. He says, maybe identify in life where you are a captive. Where are you a captive in life? V'lotzeis mizeh, and to free yourself from whatever captivity you are in. Eifo hamakom shebam anachnu pashat shvuyim le'olam hazeh. Liyetzer hara, laharagolim sheis ragalnu bahem, l'rashtos chavrasios u'l'miskamos chavrasios. What are the things I'm held hostage by? Some of us are ultimately, again, captive to negative peer groups. Some of us are captive to addictions. Others are captive to bad behaviors, bad traits, bad midos. We're often held captive, or we allow ourselves to remain in the captivity of negative things in this world. He says, maybe our avoda is upashat, lahotzi es atzmenu bekoach me'ashevi. You want to know what you could do for the hostages? You want to know what you could do? What do we want for them more than anything? We want them to be freed from captivity. Maybe something I could do for them is to free myself from my captivity. Because, writes Eistzrov, everyone is held captive by something. Not everyone is held captive by someone, but everyone is held captive by something. And imagine if each of us identified what we are held captive by, and we find the strength to free ourselves, to emancipate ourselves, to bring ourselves out of captivity. he says something amazing. He says, "Mimashu echa livcho shanach magishim v'toch kedei yitzia zu lehispalel v'likros." And as we emancipate ourselves, as we bring ourselves out of captivity, we daven alongside of that, and we go ahead. Likras hashamayim, liskos lischus hashavuyim sheyetzu merashoim ba'aza b'karov mamish. And if we daven to Hashem, and in the course of davening to Hashem, we free ourselves from the very things which we are captive to. Hashlit, right? He says that's something we could do for the shvuyim. That's something. So what is he utilizing? What he's saying is, vulnerability doesn't have to be a handicap. Vulnerability could be a strength. That when you feel vulnerable, do something with that vulnerability. So I could say, I feel so vulnerable, I feel so afraid, I feel so sad, and that's it. You could just feel, and that's it, and do nothing. And allow those feelings to allow you to remain powerless, and that's it. Or I could say, I feel so sad, I feel so vulnerable, and yes, I feel so upset, but I'm not going to allow myself to feel it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to free myself in some way from the captivity, from the thing that is holding me captive. That's taking a vulnerability and making it a strength. And that's what David HaMelech is teaching us in this very kapitel. V'ani amarti b'shalvi ba'amoti alam. David HaMelech says, when I was a young man, I made a mistake. And what was my mistake? That life was going to be easy. And by the way, it's a mistake that many of us make. We saw this many times. One of the worst things you could ever do in life is expect life to be easy. You see this all the time. People get rattled very easily. Especially today, right? People go ahead. People like anything. I always find it amazing that people fall into like deep theological crises for relatively minor things, right? Why is that? I think, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think, but I could play one for the rest of this year, right? But I think it's because presently we have an expectation that life is supposed to be easy, that life is supposed to be calm, that life is supposed to be tranquil. So when it doesn't go well, I'm rattled. Well, there's a better idea. Who told you life is supposed to be easy? Who told you life is supposed to be tranquil? In fact, the best thing you can do for yourself is say, life is difficult. And it's supposed to be difficult because it's the difficulties that bring out greatness. Are there episodes, are there moments, are there periods of time of tranquility? Yes. Do we hope that those periods of time, are prolonged? Absolutely. Do they generally extend for a long time? Absolutely not. But it's okay. Expect it. David HaMelech says, I can't believe I was so foolish. I thought life was going to be a walk in the park. And then life happened. And I realized life is incredibly difficult. And I feel so scared and I feel so vulnerable. But then I realized that if I own the vulnerability, if I take that vulnerability and say to myself, okay, I'm feeling vulnerable, what can I do with it? Then the vulnerability itself becomes the very source of strength. Then suddenly, again, I don't just have to cry and to daven for my brothers and sisters who are being held captive. I can do something. I could bring myself out of my captivity as hopefully a schus for them. And when you go ahead and A, you acknowledge your vulnerability, B, own your vulnerability, and C, use your vulnerability as a strength, then what happens? Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. Then suddenly the vulnerability becomes a song. It's no longer a handicap. It's no longer a detriment. But it's that very vulnerability that allows me to accomplish great things. It's that very vulnerability that leads to the Chanukas Habayis, the dedication and solidification of the personalistic home. It's the acknowledgement, ownership, and usage of that vulnerability that ultimately allows me to solidify and concretize my identity. That's the greatness of David HaMelech. The greatness of David HaMelech doesn't really lie as much in what he did, but it's his ability to take the immutable features of the human condition that so many regard as a weakness and turn it into strength. And if you could do that, then all of us have the ability to sing Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. We have the ability to steady ourselves. We have the ability to solidify ourselves. And we have the ability ultimately to create strong and enduring personalities. We'll stop over here for tonight, Miras Hashem. Next week, our pre-Chanukah Shir. So Miras Hashem will be doing the same kapitel, chapter 30, but Miras Hashem will be focusing much more on Chanukah. There's also a tie-in for Chanukah from this week, but it's already a little bit late, so we'll save it to Miras Hashem for next week. Again, wonderful to see everyone today. Thank you for coming out in the inclement weather, and halabai, it should be a week of Besoros Talvos Klal Yisrael.